Alrighty, well, we have a shorter session today, so I want to make my introductory remarks very quick so we can dive right into it. If you're looking to find and settle yourself into where you are right now, you are at the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. Very excited to have you here. I am Danielle Hubley, Advocacy and Education Manager with the partnership. You also have our staff person, Sean Gio, our Senior Policy Advisor. We're both here to support you if you run into any tech issues or you have any questions about the conference. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. But with that, the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference features local, state, national experts leading conversations that explore challenges, share best practices, and coalesce us around crucial next steps to address key affordable housing issues in the state. This year's conference theme is building stability, and each session spotlights unique approaches to strengthening housing stability for households and communities across Connecticut. You can join our conversation. We've been live tweeting the last 2 days and are continuing to do so today using our hashtag CAHC 2022, and you can follow us at our Twitter, PSC Housing, if you're not already. The next one, today's session is Time is Not on Our Side, Closing Deals in 2022. That is where you are now. It is 11 a.m. Before I hand it over to our presenters, I want to thank our leading sponsors, the Connecticut Department of Housing, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, La Rosa Building Group, Melville Charitable Trust, and Wells Fargo. Their deep support has allowed the conference to happen again this year. We couldn't do it without them. Similarly, for our collaborating sponsors, you can see listed here. We're so excited to work with them and so grateful for their support. And lastly, our supporting sponsors as well. So thankful and grateful for for the relationships we've had over the years and for your support of this conference. This session is being sponsored by Penrose Bricks and Mortar, Hearts and Souls. So we're very happy and grateful that you are sponsoring today's session. Few quick items of housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded. All recordings are going to be made available as soon as possible on our YouTube channel. So join us there if you've missed any conversations you want to see from the conference. All participants have entered muted. Please remain on mute unless a speaker asks you to unmute. And again, if you have any tech issues, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Sean or any other partnership staff you see on the call. Your speakers will let you know how they would like content questions to be submitted, but you can have any comment in the chat function of your webinar. After the session, you can complete a quick session feedback survey by clicking on the megaphone icon in the lobby. We super appreciate your feedback, so hopefully you take a moment to do that for each session you've attended. Really quickly, our iForum, this last iForum of the year for the partnership is happening Tuesday, December 6th. It'll be focused on tenant-based subsidies in Connecticut, particularly on equitable expansion. It's really going to feature an overview of tenant-based housing subsidy programs in Connecticut, who accesses these programs, the deep positive impact housing subsidies have on households' quality of life, and how we can all work to ensure equitable expansion of housing subsidies. So it's a great conversation. We'll drop the link in the chat, but hoping you can join us for that conversation as well next month. And with all of that, I am going to pass it off to Emily Burton to kick off the conversation.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right, can everybody see that? Yes, okay. Great, well, thank you all for joining. We're very excited about this panel. I'm here today with my colleague Leanne Hanfield-Curtin and Andrea Gomes from Hinckley Allen, who will introduce themselves in a bit. Here we go. Our panel is about closing deals in 2022. Obviously, everybody here on this presentation is probably very familiar with the challenges and the difficulties in developing affordable housing. It's always been very complicated, and I think in the last couple of years, it's gotten particularly harder. And so our hope with this presentation is to highlight some of the difficulties that we've been experiencing as a developer and as a land use attorney over the last couple of years, and using a case study for a deal that we just closed in Connecticut about 45, 60 days ago, just to give some some real life solutions that we were able to figure out. We certainly don't have it all figured out, but these were some of the things that worked for us, and hopefully that's helpful to all of you. So I'm Emily Bouton. I'm a development director at Beacon Communities. Leanne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, folks. Just to echo Emily's comments, thank you all for having us. We're thrilled to be here. I am also a development director with Beacon Communities.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'll echo again. Thank you to everyone for having us. My name is Andrea Gomes. I'm an associate attorney at Hinckley Allen in Hartford, practicing primarily in land use law. I'm excited to be here.
Great, thanks. So quickly, we'll make this fast. We wanted to just provide some context for who Beacon is. Some of you may know us, some of you may not, but we're a Boston-based real estate company. We have a development arm, management arm, design arm. Leanne and I are both on the development side. Our portfolio is mostly New England, New York, Pennsylvania, some properties outside of that region, but we've been working in Connecticut for about, I don't know, 15, 20 years maybe. And we've done some recent developments here that we're really proud of. And we call ourselves a mission-driven for-profit, so our expertise is definitely in affordable housing, complicated deals, vulnerable resident populations, and you'll hear about some of that in our case study today. So I went over this already, but really we're going to be talking about the challenges with closing affordable housing deals in 2022. And the theme, as you could tell from the title, is that time obviously has a really sometimes detrimental impact on a project. Both in terms of cost and just complications and everything. We're going to format the presentation into 3 phases of a development. So Leanne will take you through one, Andrea will take you through one, I'll take you through one, and we're going to be using the Parkside Village development in Branford as our test case. So Leanne, you want to take us away?
Sure. You still, okay, perfect. Oh, do you want to talk about Parkside just generally?
Yeah. So Parkside is an existing state public housing development that was done in 1974. It is deteriorating, very small unit size. There wasn't a lot of operating dollars to really keep it in good physical shape. It's home to residents that are either elderly or have a disability. Many of them are both. And it was owned by the Housing Authority of the town of Branford, who reached out to developers back in 2015 for partnership to redevelop the site. They selected Beacon, and we closed on it in September. And what the project will involve is demolition of the existing housing. It was just beyond, it could not be rehabbed for the state that it was in, and a new construction of a 67-unit building where all of the existing residents that live there are eligible to move into the new building when it's built. And of the 67 units, 60 of them are affordable to households that earn 60% AMI or below. So here you just see a rendering of what the building will look like, and then a map for where Branford is. It's just outside of New Haven on the shoreline.
Perfect. Thanks, Emily. And I also would just mention before we get too far into this that I think you guys might have a chat function. We will be monitoring that as we go. We'll also save some time at the end for Q&A, but feel free if you want to throw a question, in the chat box. We will get to it throughout the course of this presentation, this panel. So we're starting off in phase 1, as Emily mentioned. We break it up into 3 phases, and the first phase is really this due diligence and pre-approvals phase, which most of you are probably very familiar with. But even in those early days, there really are often many challenges, and we'll talk about solutions as well. But in those early days, you really can have some early challenges that if you can get ahead of, really can set yourself up for more success along the way. So first we have building a quality team, and even in that feasibility and conceptual stage, you often need a team around you to fully vet the idea, the concept. And this can include your design professionals and your legal team, your environmental or your civil engineers. And it's important at this early stage to really have a quality team in place. But one of the biggest challenges we see is that bringing on a team in this market or in this environment often has an unknown horizon, right? Firms have their own commitments, their own workloads, their own team capacities. And signing on to something that could take years to come to fruition can be a challenge for a lot of development partners. So one of the solutions that we here at Beacon have found is to really form early and meaningful relationships. Using local partners when you can, who understand the community dynamic, can also be a big help. But in all cases, you really want to make sure that you're building a team with the expertise to navigate the challenges that are still to come. Much, some of them sooner, some of them farther. As we'll see in the case of Parkside, there were some bigger ones that were, even we couldn't predict that added years to the process. So we'll get more into that in a minute. But ultimately, if you can build a team with, that you have ongoing working relationships with, it can really pay dividends in the long run, especially when those unforeseen delays come into play and you need partners that can help you problem solve long term. The piece to be mindful of as we talk about building this team here is any procurement requirements that you have, be it from certain sites, RFPs that you might respond to, or from potential funding sources. And so balancing these two priorities, both forming those early relationships and being aware of any procurement standards, can also be a challenge and something that we just need to be mindful of, again, in this early stage. Building a budget is also another very common challenge. And one of the easiest things to do in the development community for developers is to use comps and similar projects that they've done of a similar type and scale to establish early underwriting assumptions. But of course, the challenge, and even more so now, is that none of us have a crystal ball. And we don't know where the market's heading or where it will be in 2 or 3 or 5 years, as sometimes the case might be. We don't know what we don't know, right? I'm foreshadowing again a little bit here, but we can't predict things like uphill zoning battles that cost the project real money and real time delays. So in that same financial bucket, we also have the challenge of funding pre-development costs. The lead times combined with the early analysis you have to do really require spending real money up front. And most partners aren't in the business of waiting to get paid until closing, which again can be years down the road. So it really falls to the developer to fund those pre-development costs. And that can be a big ticket item when you're getting into zoning issues, into legal battles, into developing plans and specs. Fortunately for Beacon, we happen to be in a position where we can typically fund those costs, but a lot of smaller developers or nonprofits or people looking to break into this affordable housing development sphere really don't have that luxury. And so then they have to rely on pre-development financing. And there again, you're running into increased added costs to the deal. So it can start to feel a bit like a vicious cycle as you're doing that early underwriting analysis. Site control is also another issue that really requires upfront money and also legal time. Developers also need to retain site control through whatever hurdles or delays that might come our way. And depending on the length of those hurdles, that can really involve big extension payments or hard deposits. So what we're really talking about here in this due diligence upfront phase is really the developer's assessment of and their appetite for a risk. And I think more than ever now, this is becoming a bigger challenge across the board because the risks are growing. And we're going to take you through some more of those as we go through. And you want to move me to the next slide? So this is sticking in this first phase. We developed a timeline for everybody. And this is, again, just the very first phase of our test case to Parkside Village. And as you can see, even though it's that early stage where we were doing a feasibility analysis and selecting our community partners, you can see that it's really took 2.5, close to 3 years just to get through that first phase. And so there you can see in real time what it takes to even get a deal off the ground and into, call it, the real approval process where the deal is actually starting to move forward.
Great, thanks, Leanne. Hello again, everyone. Andrea Gomes. So my goal is to now take you through what we're calling phase 2, the approvals process. Before I do that, I do want to say I saw a question in the chat about the parcel size for Parkside Village. It's located on South Monowies in Brantford, and it was about 5 acres. So with that, Lan just took us through, you now have your pre-approval due diligence out of the way, and it's time to get your local approvals. Where do you start? You start with assembling your team if you don't have them already. Substantive knowledge is definitely important, and that applies to your civil engineer, your traffic engineer, your architect, and so on. But so is the ability to respond to complicated questions on the spot at a hearing, for example, to turn written revisions or response materials around quickly, and to present clearly and convincingly to a local commission or board. All of those things matter and should be considered when you're selecting your team. Doing your research early on in the approvals process is important too. Evaluate the applicable regulations or statute like 830G and confirm that your plan complies. And if it doesn't, how can you bring it into compliance? Your research should also include research into the local approvals process. Is there a requirement or a policy that applicants meet with the Planning and Zoning Commission in advance for an informal pre-application? Is that wise for your particular development plan? How about design review, Conservation Commission? Are there commission bylaws that could potentially impact the timeline of your approvals process? These are all things to keep in mind and look out for as you're doing your initial research. They're not necessarily barriers to development, of course, but they can add a substantial amount of time onto this phase 2, your approvals process. And we all know that at the end of the day, as Emily will bookend for us, time is money. So once you have your materials drafted, you'll want to ensure, of course, and this is stating the obvious, that they're accurate and that they're complete. I know that there's often a rush to get things submitted, particularly if you have deadlines looming in the distance, funding deadlines, purchase and sale agreement deadlines. But once you submit, you're on the clock, so to speak, meaning the statutory clock for the disposition of a land use application. That's ticking once you submit, and you don't want to waste time making substantial revisions to application materials that you could have done in advance. More generally, if you go in and you try and submit a zoning application that's incomplete, you could simply be turned away by staff for it being incomplete, and that can set you back. So always our tagline is a little bit of time and a little bit of heartache at the outset benefits you in the long run. And we've definitely seen that be the case throughout all of the applications we've done. So all of this research will help you set your goal for a submission deadline and the ensuing anticipated approval schedule. Of course, you should keep your funding deadlines, as I mentioned, in mind, as well as any deadlines in your purchase and sale agreement, if applicable. We say start with those deadlines and then work your way backward. And always build an extra time for surprises. If a peer review is requested in the middle of a public hearing, that could set you back. So as you're setting these schedules, build in time, and we'll see with Parkside in just a moment that certainly was the case. Next slide, Emily. Okay, so procedure, what keeps us land use lawyers up at night? The land use approvals process is a minefield of procedural requirements and deadlines. And if you miss one, best case scenario is that you set yourself back a month, maybe more. Worst case scenario is discovering some type of procedural defect, either during the hearing process or even after the approval process, requiring you to either start from scratch or risk moving forward, knowing that you could be faced with either a denial from the commission or an appealable issue at the Superior Court level if an appeal is filed. So just a few examples here of common things that we see and things that we look out for. Wetlands applications. If you have wetlands on your property, the application has to be submitted on the same day or before the related zoning application. Again, failing to do so is a valid basis for denial for the commission. Referrals to regional councils of government. These are required at least 30 days before a public hearing on the zone change or the text amendment. And it's for applications that impact land within 500 feet of another municipality. Again, if you don't have that in early, you're talking a delay of at least a month. I can tell you that some municipalities will refer zone changes or text amendments to their regional COGs just as a matter of course or as a matter of policy, even if they're not within that 500-foot purview. So that's something that could come up during your initial research into the local land use process. A butter notification. understand what is required for a butter notification for your application early on, assemble your list early on, and then check and recheck that list before you actually send the mailing out. We always say we err on the side of caution. If you think someone might be entitled to notice, send them a notice anyway. Better to be over-inclusive than to miss in a butter. And again, be in that situation where you're having to start from scratch or failing a denial reason or appealable issue. And then last but not least, newspaper publication. It's required twice at certain intervals by statute. And while the publication is normally handled by town staff, an error on staff's part will delay the applicant all the same. So just because it's staff's error doesn't mean it doesn't impact the applicant. So what we typically do is we ask town staff to send us a draft of the public hearing notice in advance, just to get an extra set of eyes on it. There's no malintent here. It's just a matter of things are moving quickly and sometimes things are missed or things need to be tweaked from the legal perspective. So we ask to see that draft in advance. We provide any edits we think are necessary, and then you can be sure that we are asking when and where those notices will be published, and we are pulling them as soon as they are published to ensure that we've met those deadlines. Not keeping an eye on that, again, you're looking at lost time. Next slide, Emily. Thank you. So you've done all this pre-application and pre-hearing work, and you finally get to the public hearing. And that's your time to explain to the commission or to the board why you're entitled to your approval, how you meet that statutory or regulatory burden, and why, generally, just talking on more of a public policy perspective, why the particular development, in this case, affordable housing, is necessary and beneficial to the town. In other words, and one of the things, that you'll want to keep in mind throughout every moment of that public hearing is make your record. It's unfortunately not unusual for applicants to feel like they need to move quickly through a public hearing, especially if the hour is late and you're late on the agenda or it's the second or third public hearing night. But you need to put, as the applicant and as part of the consultant team, you need to put the evidence on that shows that you're entitled to compliance. You need to put that on into the record as efficiently as possible and bolster that with written materials. Expert testimony, and this is connected to making your record. Expert testimony is key here. Rely on your experts. Remember, you assembled that amazing team, that all-star team who knows the material inside and out. Rely on your experts to present their respective areas and to answer follow-up questions. Include their resumes in your submissions, all things that bolster their credibility. And again, the theme of this session is time, and having these experts who can efficiently and succinctly answer these questions on the spot or in written materials will help save the applicant time and move things along. Applicants should do their best to field questions during the hearings, but it really comes down to kind of reading the room and also the tenor of the question. Understand it's sometimes a better approach, and it's actually a time saver to say, we, Madam Chair or Mr. Chairman, we will respond to those questions received in writing in advance of the next public hearing. It sounds like a delay of sorts, but it's sometimes better to not ad lib and to just get those items in writing, particularly if they're more on the technical side of things. And of course, keep track of your statutory deadlines. We have 65 days to open the public hearing, 35 days to conduct the hearing, and 65 days to get a vote once the hearing's closed. The applicant can provide an extension of time up to 65 days. And I'm just talking for general zoning applications, but keep an eye on that clock and make sure that you're on track to close and to provide your evidence within that time frame. Next slide, Emily. Thanks. So now, even if you do everything correctly, you've done all your research, you've checked and rechecked your abutters list and all of the things we just talked about, there are certain things that are somewhat beyond your control that can impact the timeline of a land use approval. So one of the easy ones, the low-hanging fruit here, is commission scheduling. Sometimes it's hard to get a quorum in August or December due to vacations or holidays. So that's something that's a bit out of your control. Questions that can be asked in advance in discussions with town staff. Neighborhood opposition. Not only are we talking about public comment at the public hearing, both verbal or in writing, but the neighborhood opposition or opposition competitors can submit things like a 22A19 environmental intervention petition, which allows the intervener to present evidence as to the impact of your development on environmental resources. You can have a protest petition be filed for a zone change or a text amendment, and we'll get into that in just a second with respect to Parkside. All of these things will add additional time, not only onto the actual hearing, but to the applicant's responses and things that they need to respond to or address in their materials and verbally. Staff pushback. If you're getting some pushback from staff on certain items, that's an additional bucket of questions and comments and requested revisions that you need to respond to throughout the process. And jumping way ahead after phase 3, if an appeal is filed, or actually it would be before phase 3, excuse me, if an appeal is filed, or if you as the applicant have to file an appeal, you are at the mercy of the court system. Things do move along, and we're seeing things move along more quickly than they have the last couple of years from COVID, but you are still adding a number of months onto your land use approvals process if there's an appeal in there. Next slide, Emily. Thank you. So seeing this in action, we had that timeline that you saw that Leanne put up on the screen for phase 1. I've taken the opportunity here to write out a couple of things specifically for Parkside, just to show that some things are just beyond your control, even if you do everything right at the outset. So for Parkside specifically, I'll just run through this quickly. In 2016, that's when the first zoning application for Parkside was submitted. But then in the face of neighborhood opposition, it was withdrawn. In 2017, this unusual site, a lot line anomaly was discovered in the midst of doing the due diligence for the site. So the applicants, while working on the zoning behind the scenes, had to petition Branford's legislative authority, its RTM, for a land swap, meaning a lot line adjustment to correct this lot line oddity. That same month, we submitted a second zoning application, this time pursuant to 830G, the Affordable Housing Land Use Appeals Act in Connecticut. And during the course of that public hearing, the opponents filed that protest petition. In 2018, the commission denied, in essence, the second zoning application by concluding that because of that protest petition, which requires a 2/3 vote or a supermajority vote, was required for the rezoning for 830G and conditioning the site plan approval on the rezoning. So it was an effective denial. We appealed to the Superior Court. While that appeal was proceeding, we're fighting on different fronts, so to speak. The RTM denied an easement that was necessary to construct a secondary access for the site plan that we had proceeded with for that application. By October of 2018, the Superior Court had found that protest petitions don't apply to 830G applications. So we won, and we had to move forward from there. Next slide, Emily. Thank you. So 2019 was a busy year. By 2019, January, the commission had revised the resolution to remove reference to the protest petition. So we had our approval. But again, we didn't have that easement we needed to construct that secondary access from the RTM. So we filed another application to revise the site plan. The commission in June approved the application subject to a laundry list of conditions of approval. And we had some concerns with some of those conditions. So to preserve our rights, we filed a second appeal with the Superior Court as we tried to get some clarification from the commission and their counsel on the meaning and the intent behind some of these conditions. While the appeal was proceeding and while we're trying to get this clarification, we filed another application with the Planning and Zoning Commission to revise the site plan and to remove a couple of specific conditions that impacted our development, having to do with a request from the commission that we obtain essentially an easement from the town of Branford so that town of Branford emergency vehicles could access a portion of our site over town land. That was not doable for the applicants, so we filed that appeal to challenge that, but also we're working on a couple of fronts and trying to modify the approval with the Planning and Zoning Commission. In November of 2019, Planning and Zoning Commission approved our minor tweaks to the site plan, but ultimately denied our request to remove the problematic approval condition. So we appealed that denial as well and proceeded with consolidating those two appeals. Next slide. In 2020, the Superior Court sustained those appeals that we had consolidated, and it took until April 2021, working behind the scenes with counsel for the commission to get the approved resolution in place. So by April 2021, we had our final approval from the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we could move forward with phase 3. But before I hand it over to Emily, I'm going to ask Emily just to go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is bordering on illegible. I totally understand that. And it's essentially what you saw Leanne put up on the screen for phase 1 a few moments ago, and the timeline version of what I just ran through for the Parkside approvals process. But it's really just to show that from the beginning of phase 1 up until the April 2021 approval resolution from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So just phases 1 and 2, you're talking about 7.5 years. And that's what it took to move Parkside along. It's unusual, I think, for a proposal or a development to go this long, but this is precisely why we wanted to use Parkside as our test case, so to speak, for today's session. So with that, I'll hand it over to Emily for phase 3.
Great, thank you. So basically, we took you through the very long period that the project was first brought to Beacon's table, which was in 2015, and when we ultimately closed in 2022. Pretty much every single month in that 7-year period, we were spending money on the project. And as Andrea detailed, this isn't the zoning process that we went through was definitely particularly painful. And that isn't going to be true with every single project. But my takeaway from it was we have this amazing tool in Connecticut for 830G where, yes, ultimately we were permitted, but it had an incredible financial implication on the project. And but for some of the other parties that came in and helped us solve the problem, which I'll get to in a second, this project would not have been possible. We just would not have had the funds to make it happen. So we would have a permit, but not the ability to actually close and build it. So this chart shows just with the passage of time, what that did to project costs from the moment that Beacon got involved in 2015 until closing. And not only that, but the moment that we applied for funding in 2020 until closing, which I think is even a little bit more relevant to everybody here on the phone who's probably all trying to close deals in Connecticut in some way or another. So we applied and were awarded funding in 2020 to CHFA and the Department of Housing. And between that moment and when we closed, you'll see that our TDC went up 19%, our soft costs went up 47%, which is crazy. Our construction costs only went up 7%, which is still a lot of money, but not as bad as we've seen in other projects. And you'll see the interest rate almost doubled, or the interest almost doubled, the interest rate doubled, the perm loan interest rate increased by quite a lot. So there were a lot of industry-wide factors, inflation, construction costs, all that stuff that affects almost all projects right now in affordable housing development. But you know, in particular with Parkside, just the extraordinary soft costs involved, many of which had to do with what Andrea just described, really made closing it very financially difficult. So here are some of the solutions that the project benefited from. And it, you know, I can't take credit and give Beacon the pat on the back for all of this, because it really was a lot of who was involved in the team and the contributions that other parties made. So first is that we have a really strong relationship with the contractor that Leanne mentioned as part of phase 1. They held pricing from January of this year until closing, which is super unusual. We were very worried about that. Our lenders were very worried about construction costs going up. Unfortunately, we were able to keep them stagnant between January and September of this year. We had a very nimble and understanding team. Obviously, everybody here realizes that affordable housing is not just about business, it's a mission. And, you know, the idea is that we provide housing for people that need it. And so it was very helpful to have people on the team who had that shared goal and were able to move things around and be as flexible as they could be. For example, we changed our permanent lender 90 days prior to closing. We had originally been working with this one party for about 2 years. In this interest rate environment that we're in, their program just wouldn't work. We couldn't make the numbers work. So we brought in a new lender in June, and they were fantastic. And the rest of the team was very willing to pivot and work with them to get the numbers to work. We had a really strong partnership here with Elm City Communities. They're the New Haven Housing Authority, Moving to Work Housing Authority, and through that Moving to Work, they were able to provide project-based vouchers to this project, even though it's not in New Haven. So it was a strong suburban urban partnership, and that really helped the project's numbers. We also went back to the state after our initial 2020 application in the summer of 2021, when we realized that the numbers just weren't working. We made an additional funding request, and the Department of Housing awarded us more soft debt, which was huge. And finally, through the Housing Authority's involvement, so again, this project is owned by the Brantford Housing Authority, we were able to get a tax abatement through the town of Brantford. So the project's paying no real estate taxes, which obviously allowed us to borrow more debt, and we got the numbers to work. And so again, this is like the full timeline, no pressure to read this, obviously it's illegible, but you can see that it took almost 9 years from first feasibility until we closed in 2022. And then it'll be another couple of years before the building is actually done. And so through all that time, you know, the cashier, just the register keeps clicking. It's just, it really adds a lot of cost. And so, you know, as we said, time is not on our side. It can make a huge difference. An unfriendly or a community that does not want to see affordable housing can really have a detrimental impact on soft costs. And it's tough out there, but it's doable. And we hope that some of these anecdotes from Parkside help give you faith that, you know, it's not all depressing. And so that's it for our presentation. We want to leave time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat. But have we gotten any questions in the chat yet? Let's see.
Yeah, Emily, so we do. We have a couple questions. One, can we discuss what the development timeline might have been without the Planning Commission denial and the protest petition?
Yes,
yeah.
I can. So all affordable housing deals take a couple of years, and some are more complicated than others. This, in my personal experience, was certainly the longest project that I've ever worked on. I feel like I just started working at Beacon when we started doing it. It's been a long haul. I would say, Leanne, what do you think? 3 years between project inception and when you actually close and start construction, I would say is pretty typical.
I think that's right. I think, yeah, I agree. I was going to say, Emily, I think it is a case by case basis, like you said. And I think, you know, best case scenario, probably you need a year to get to an application, right? Just all the pieces you need to pull together and the prep you need to do. And then assuming you can hear about those awards within 6 months, you probably then need a year to close. And as we're saying now, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot can change in those 3 years, right? So what you think you may have started with, by the time you're funded and awarded, you could have some unforeseen challenges there. But again, in best case scenario, I would say 3 years, good number.
Right. Let me add just a little bit of context, just in my little phase 2, the land use approvals process. I see Sean's question about without the Planning Commission denial and the protest petition. So we had a couple of issues with Parkside, which one of which was the RTM denial of that secondary access that we had gotten approval for with that I'll call it the initial 830G application. It was technically the second zoning application, but the first 830G one. So we would have had to go back to planning and zoning for a site plan modification anyway. So it's tough to tell. It's you know, if we had a crystal ball, it's tough to tell how long that specific development would have taken absent the denial and the protest petition and all of that. But I can tell you that with doing all the work that we typically do and doing the same level of detail in the submission, we've recently received approvals from submission to approval from the commission in 3 months. So on the land use approval side of things, if you go through and you get your approval, it can be 2 to 3 months, sometimes even less. So Parkside was quite an unusual case.
Yep. Peggy asked what percentage or number of units at Parkside received project-based vouchers from Elm City. So we got 40 project-based vouchers, which is about 60% of the total unit count.
Yeah. And Emily, just to go back, Sean had a second question. Is it unusual for a planning commission to deny the redevelopment of the town's public housing authority property? I'd say yes. I don't have any specific statistics on the number of approvals versus denials, but overall part of the confusion, I guess, was that we were getting pushback, neighborhood opposition, and ultimately effectively denials from the Planning and Zoning Commission for a Branford Housing Authority development. So that is unusual.
Right. And also related to that, which I always found very confusing, is that this was an existing development. It was already there. I mean, it's not unusual for people to oppose the development, a new construction of affordable housing, but to improve an existing development that exists and has been for 50 years, I never quite understood where that logic came from.
Agree.
Emily, I also received a question, if we could share the slides. I don't know if Chelsea or Dan, or if someone, there's a way to do that from the housing partnerships perspective.
Yes, we can definitely share those slides. We have them.
Thank you.
So I think Emily, Leanne, we have 2 minutes left. If anyone else has any other comments or questions, we'd be happy to take them. Okay.
All right.
All right.
Oh, we got one. Did the number of units remain constant? No. The existing housing was 50 units and the new building will be 67 units. So it is an increase of 17, an increase of 10 affordable units. There's 7 market rate units in the new building.
Right. Great.
All
Thank you
right.
so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank
Of
you. Pleasure.
Bye.